Hi, I'm Anya, also known as Meppity, and today's video is all about specificity and how it can instantly improve your art. And when I say that, I mean it. A lot of young artists assume there's some secret hidden formula to becoming a better artist. And though I don't think it's true, it's all down to patience and practice, I think the idea of specificity is about as close as it gets to getting better really fast. There are so many requisites to making a good piece of art, ranging from technical skills to how you present your work to having a good idea in the first place. Specificity can be applied in all of these areas and much more to make your stuff stand out and feel stronger. Before we dive in though, a huge thank you to today's sponsor, the Ridge wallet. I have been using this super clunky, tatty wallet for many years now, and though it holds the stuff I need it to hold, it's bulky and doesn't look nice in my pocket, and is kind of starting to feel a little bit gross. In contrast, the Ridge is super sleek, compact, and incredibly durable. I am obsessed with this little thing. It does exactly what it needs to do, and it looks awesome. When I was checking out all the designs, I had a really hard time choosing. All of the designs are so cool and there's so many to choose from. So ended up getting multiple and have now gifted the others to special people in my life. Not only does it look good, it's super tough. Like, if this got in a fight with a bear, I'm sure that the wallet would win. Father's Day is coming up pretty soon, so if you have any paternal figures in your life that you would like to give a gift to, I have an idea for you. Why not head down to the description and check out ridge.com/Meppity. On top of that, if you would like 15% off, you can use the code Meppity, that is MEPPITY at checkout, and boom, the wallet is yours for a little bit less of the price. Thanks again to the Ridge for sponsoring me today. Now back to the main video. To begin, the Oxford Dictionary defines specific as clearly defined or identified. Ironic considering we're being specific about the specifics of specificity. Essentially, it's about making active choices and having a purpose, a reason behind those decisions. So why is being specific so good? Well, it makes you less generic. If you are choosing something actively, there is a chance that you're going to stand out more than something that is a little wishy-washy and basic. A really good way of figuring out if something is specific enough, or in other words, iconic enough, is if you got a 5-year-old to draw it. If a 5-year-old can, without any technical skill, grab a couple crayons and draw a minion from memory, and you recognize it, then that is a sign of good design. And that comes from making very specific choices that haven't been made before. A personal definition of good art is something that has a lasting impact. Think of how many artists are out there right now. There are millions of us on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, and we're all trying to make it big, we're all trying to get people's attention. You really have to fight to stand out. And that is something you're going to have to do if you want to pick art as a career. Okay, so let's get a little more specific. Here are some examples of where specificity can be applied. We'll start with drawing and technical areas, lighting and shadow. A lot of beginner artists fall flat with their lighting because they aren't being specific with their light sources, or they haven't decided on if it's going to be like cool or warm, or if the lighting is harsh or soft. If you are specific, you can evoke really specific moods with your work. For example, right now, I very specifically placed my light here. Yes, it's making me shiny, but at least it lights me evenly. If I suddenly decided to get a bright, harsh, ghoulish green light and put it under my chin, that's so unnecessarily spooky and just doesn't fit the vibe of what I want this video to be. Even though we make cartoons and we can draw from imagination, our work still has to have some basis in reality for a human to grasp it. Otherwise, we slip into uncanny valley territory and things can get a little confusing and uncomfortable. This can happen when our shadows are kind of wishy-washy and don't make sense to the world we're in. A lot of getting better with lighting is not only choosing where your light source is, but studying how shapes interact with light. That is something that takes more time, but actively thinking about it is much faster than the practice side of things. Combine the two together and it makes you a much more solid artist pretty quickly. Anatomy is another big one. Humans are drawn to things that are strange or that stand out, not just in a good way, but in a bad way. And so it could mean even if you have a phenomenal piece of artwork with really cool designs, really cool lighting, but something is bent out of place, we spot that, and that's where our eyeballs are focused. Essentially, it's a distraction to the rest of your art, and it's a total shame. Studying anatomy is a really great and important idea, and I don't mean studying it in a medical textbook type of way. I just mean having a basic grasp of where muscles are placed, how they're connected to each other, how the skeleton works, and this applies for humans and animals. So if you are specific in your anatomy choices, you can use your brain power on other things, which makes you faster and makes your work feel better. This brings us on to poses and acting. So once you have an idea of anatomy, now how are you positioning it to tell us what you want to tell? For example, if I drew a sad character, I'm not just going to have them have a blank facial expression, am I? But I'm also not just going to put a frown on them, because that is not specific. There is a whole range of sadnesses. It could be someone who's a little bothered by something that happened earlier. It could be someone who is utterly distraught about a future situation. There's so many specifics within the idea of sadness that you can draw from, and you can put those nuances into not only the face, but the body, the posture. That just says a lot more than if someone was standing neutrally with their hands at their sides. Even if I am drawing a character in a neutral type of way, you can still put a little bit of personality into that. For example, my character Janie. She's really bright and bubbly, full of energy, always kind of in your face, very giggly. So if I'm having her at her side, she's got her chest up, she's got a straight back, she's got a smile on her face, maybe a cheeky grin, you know, that type of smile, and she looks like she's happy to be there. On the other hand, there's my character Nico, who's basically the total opposite of her. His neutral position is to be a little hunched over, hands in pockets, looking down into himself, chin tucked, not making eye contact with us, a bit of a miffed expression on his face, furrowed brow. That's both of their defaults, and it says a lot about them. That brings us on to more aspects of design. We can start with things like shape and line. If you are drawing shapes and they're kind of wishy-washy and you're not being decisive on if it's a straight line or a curved line, or if the angle is sharp or kind of softened, then it's like you just kind of drew something and hoped for the best. By being specific in your line choice of like, okay, this is a straight line, this is curved, this is squared off over here, it feels like you have purpose behind each part of the drawing. Essentially, don't sit on the fence. If you have an arm, for example, real human arms, we have one joint at the elbow, right? And so it makes these rigid shapes. But a lot of cartoons have incredibly noodly art styles, such as Adventure Time. But Adventure Time is specific in when that rigid arm movement is returned because, you know, it needs it to convey an action clearly. The weird in-between stage of not really being sure if you're noodly or not can look really awkward. I'm sure there's ways of doing it specifically that works really well, but for the most part, make the decision. Are you noodly? Are you rigid? This kind of feeds into proportions. Proportions can say so much about a character, like their day-to-day life, their job, their diet. Is your character super buff? Or do they have really long, skinny limbs? Or are they really short and squat? Often by really exaggerating certain aspects of a character can emphasize what about this character matters. For example, if you're having like an arm wrestler, they're gonna have big arms, right? It would be a very different type of character if they suddenly had weak, flabby limbs. Like, if you have someone who is stuck on a deserted island, they're probably not going to be very chubby if they've been there for several months of their life, unless they found an incredible massive reserve of food. But that's part of the story, and that is a specific choice that needs to be acknowledged and made. Another aspect of design that I think for some reason gets neglected a lot is clothing. Being specific in the way that clothes falls on a character means that you can gauge so much more about their personality. Is it too big or too tight on someone? Maybe that means that they are past their prime and they think they're smaller than they are, or maybe they're trying to grow into a position that they're not yet fit for. Take two different businessmen. We can have extremely different personalities even if they wear the same costume. Just one is really well put together, shirt tucked, tie neat. The other has really wrinkly clothing. The tie is halfway off of him, his shoelaces are undone, the shirt's untucked. Two very different things, same clothes. On top of that, how detailed is your clothes and what is it being detailed with? When it comes to things like patterns, it's important to know how much detail you're actually using. Are you putting this there for a reason, or is it just because it feels nice and it looks cool? Sometimes it's okay to just have a bunch of detail, but if you're animating, you need to be prepared to strip down some of your work so it's more manageable, and therefore your choices have to be more intentional. Every single line needs a purpose. And then what are those details too? Like, for example, my show idea, I draw a lot of inspiration from Art Nouveau and Art Deco. So I have a lot of the shape and line language from those styles incorporated into the environment, the world building, as well as some of the characters. And that brings me on to referencing source material. I'll go into this in more detail later, but from a design standpoint, it's just nice to have some research in front of you. Like, for example, if you have a character from the 1960s, you might as well go and do some research to see what 1960s fashion was like. But be even more specific than that. Maybe your character is in 1960s Italy. Is 1960s Italy fashion different to 1960s American fashion? Is it different to 1960s Chinese fashion? Probably. So by having that layer of specificity, your characters are going to be more believable, more accurate, and you're not going to have the experts, because trust me, there's experts in every field and they're all going to find your work someday and they're going to come and critique you. That being said, of course, you're more than welcome to take artistic liberties, but make sure again that those liberties are specific. For example, if you're telling a fictional story about a science that doesn't exist, of course you don't need to base it in reality, but you can have some aspects of real science thrown in to make the fake parts feel more convincing. Moving on from design, now it's time to talk about story. I have a question for you. Why are you telling the story that you're choosing to tell? If you are being specific enough, then that story really truly belongs to you. In the professional world, people pitch their stuff to networks, and sometimes they can buy your story, but they don't buy you. You need to make sure that you are an integral part to that story. And also, another reason why it's so important is because you want to avoid being generic. If your story can be told by anybody, then is it really that special? Probably not. That being said, even when you have very specific characters with very specific problems and a very specific plot, we are humans, right? You're a human too, so your story is going to have some element of human experience that people should be able to relate to. But it's still drawn from you and your opinions, your beliefs, who you are, so you're still the one who should be telling that. I mean, my story, Stuck in the Globosphere, is based on my upbringing in the English countryside, as well as the life I've heard about from my mother. She grew up in the Soviet Union, which was a place of longing, yearning. There was this hopefulness for a future that never ended up happening. And so I'm drawing from her experiences, her perspective. The main characters from my show are basically just me split into aspects of myself that I both like and dislike, and they are kind of arguing with each other and trying to figure themselves out. Only I can tell this story in this way because it is personal. Which brings me on to my other point, is like, what experiences can you draw from? We have only lived our own lives, so of course all of our stories are going to be informed by our experiences, our tastes. But that's where it's important to find a balance between what you already know and independent research. Referencing source material, we're back at that. Let's say you want to tell a story about an astronaut. Have you been to space? Probably not. But some people have, and I'm sure a lot of them have written accounts. If you just blindly fumble your way through what you think an astronaut's experience might be, it's not going to be particularly convincing. It's just not going to feel real or very grounded, which, okay, I know my example is an astronaut, but so they're in space, so they're not on the ground, but maybe if you're really serious about that, you could go out and interview people who actually live the life that you are trying to portray. Or if it's a historical figure who's long past, you could speak to historians. If you're a little shy, or maybe you have something more broad, the internet is a fantastic resource. Combine all of it together and you are more likely to be writing more compelling characters and telling plot stories, giving them plots that actually make sense to who they are. A huge misstep that people make is accidental self-inserts, where you have characters making decisions that you would make rather than them. Their opinions, things that impact them, their decision making is going to be, in many cases, largely different to yours because they have a very different life to you. Which does beg the question, all over again, why are you picking the characters you are picking? Does it make sense? Another really important element of your story is, who is your target audience? Let's say I want to tell a story about the weird kid who was bullied in school and doesn't have many friends and feels really insecure, maybe is just hitting puberty. I want to tell that story for the real-life weird kids who are in that exact same position, to reassure them. You need to be sensitive towards those individuals and make sure that you actually can personally connect with them. If your film resonates with who you're aiming for, that's great. But how are you expecting your story to resonate with someone if you don't know who you're trying to resonate with? Hey, Editing Anya here. Excuse the bedraggled look, but it's been over a month since I recorded the initial video, and I'm realizing only now that I never came to a full conclusion on the artistic side of specificity. So if you don't mind, allow me to do that now. Basically, one of my biggest takeaways is choosing what to emphasize, whether that be within your design, your world building, your story. It's very important for two main reasons. One, it gives you more information about whatever it is that you're working on, which then allows the audience to connect more and get a better understanding of your design, story, world building. And it can allow you to stand out from the crowd. So it's going back to the idea of being unique as opposed to generic. Because if you are telling a story or designing a character that has existed many, many times before, such as, let's say, a princess, how are you expected to be memorable and unique? Well, there's two main options, and they're both to do with exaggerating and emphasizing certain aspects. One is to find something that hasn't been emphasized before and really make that stand out, which is very doable in a lot of cases, but in some, because there's so much of this thing out in media already, maybe you have to take something that has already been exaggerated plenty of times, but emphasize it in a new way. Let's think of a medieval castle. I'm sure there's tons of stories out there, seeing as they've existed in Europe for thousands of years. And because they've existed so much, the points of emphasis have been done many times before. Usually those are the giant grey stones they're built of, or the turret, pointy, cone-shaped roofs that they have. So how can I make this new and fresh? Well, let's say my story has a lot of 50s inspiration. Perhaps it's got that like white picket fence, American nuclear family dream stuck in there, but it's also maybe taking place in a cheese-themed village. I don't know. I can take these elements and I can adjust the shape language of my castle. And I can also change the color palette. Say with these turrets, instead of making them typically triangular, I make them more kind of boomerang shape, which is pretty common in 50s design. Or I could make it cheesy, or I could do a combo of both. And so what that has done is made my design more unique and also given it more context. It feels like it's telling a story already without me even doing anything with it yet. Anyway, that's basically my summary of specificity in art. Now we'll go on to some other aspects of specificity that aren't quite drawing or story related. Another really important aspect of being an artist, especially ones that work in teams, is giving critique. You need to be really specific in your critique in a variety of ways. For example, if you see something and you say, this looks weird, this looks bad, how is that going to be useful to the person receiving critique? If you specify and say, for example, hey, the character kind of looks like they're floating, not really standing on the ground, that's a really good start. Now the person can identify what looks off. You can then take this a step even further and be like, hey, this character looks a little bit floaty, perhaps adjust the angle of the feet so that they can match the ground plane and maybe even redline it or something. Boom, you're being super specific and therefore super helpful to the person you're talking to. A good suggestion is also to speak with the recipient before you give your critique. Try and find out what their intentions are, what they are aiming for, and then adjust your critique accordingly. It kind of is going around in that cycle of like, if you get them to be specific, then you can be specific back, and then they can be more specific, therefore better. Being professional is really important for artists, especially if you're trying to do this as a career, and there's plenty of ways to be specific here too. For example, the animation industry is full of all kinds of jobs, ranging from like a 2D animator, 3D animator, a layout artist, a storyboard artist, a writer. We are only human. We only have one pair of hands and 24 hours in a day. And so as much as we may want to learn everything under the sun, it's kind of tricky with the limitations we have. That's why sometimes we just kind of have to knuckle down and focus on one thing to get really good at. Alternatively, a lot of people, such as myself, really don't want to settle down, and we want to be a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, I suppose, but okay at some. And that is also requiring specificity. You have to be really specific in how you spend your time. If I am going to try and be as productive as possible, I'm going to be focusing on skills that I can utilize first, and then maybe dive into other more random hobbies that maybe aren't going to help me pay the rent immediately. Organizing your portfolio in general is a really big one. I have talked about why I suggest having a portfolio website. I've also talked about my CalArts portfolio. I'm sure I'm going to make a dedicated portfolio video in future. So for now I'll be brief, and that is, be specific in the artwork you're showing so that you are getting the job that you actually want. You know, show the art styles you'd be willing to be working with 8 hours a day. Show the type of work, like if you want to be a background designer, show backgrounds. Why would you be showing animation if you hate animation? Also, if you have some work that's maybe mediocre compared to your other stuff, don't include it. Quality over quantity. Also, be specific in how you lay this artwork out. Recruiters are very busy and don't have a lot of time, so they need to be wowed within the first couple of clicks. And, maybe you could categorize your stuff. Say, here's your layout portion, here's your character design portion, or maybe you could separate it out into projects if you're an independent filmmaker. Make sure everything is easily accessible and laid out very intentionally so that you're making other people's viewing experience as easy and pleasant as possible. Here's more of a personal human one, but being specific in how you speak to fellow artists, recruiters, executives. If you are very clear in your ideas, your voice, your opinions, then your personality is going to shine through much more, be more distinct, and people are going to gravitate towards you. This doesn't mean you have to be loud or super brazen about your opinions. It just means that people get a good understanding of you. I mean, a distinct personality could be to be enigmatic and mysterious and quiet. But that's very different to someone who's lackluster and kind of hard to identify. You know, there's always those people out there who kind of seem to change their personality with every new friend group they become a part of. That's kind of suspicious, don't you think? Online presence is a really big one. Once something is out on the internet, it's there forever. So make sure that you are choosing to publicize things with reason. Do you really need to share that hot take? If you really need to, make sure your word choice is as good as it could possibly be. Maybe it's about keeping artwork and personal things separate. All of this stuff is very intentional and very important for the longevity of your career. When talking about presenting a single piece of artwork, let's say you have music accompanying it. Make sure the music matches the mood that your artwork is giving off. Because it would be kind of jarring if, say, you have this beautiful, twinkly nighttime scene and then it's accompanied by some blaring heavy metal. That being said, if you want that contrast, you can add it, but it has to be there for a reason. Choosing who you work with is really key. And I know sometimes we have to kind of take who and what we can get, but once you do start to build up that ability to choose, make the most of it. For example, if you're hiring a voice actor, you can get 2 voice actors, right? Maybe one is exactly how you imagine your character to sound, but they are absolutely unbearable to work with. They show up late, they never listen to you. And then you have another voice actor who's pretty close, is not quite there, but is an absolute pleasure to work with, very cooperative. You have to choose there. You have to be very specific with your future plans. Are you going to pick someone who is going to make your life harder or make your life easier, but settle for a compromise? So I've just given you a bunch of ways on how you can apply the idea of specificity. But I've got one more thing for you. When you are being specific, don't forget to ask yourself, why? By doing this, you are forced to assign purpose to your decisions, which then can help you better understand the reasoning behind your artwork. There's nothing inherently wrong with not having a reason behind something, but it can cause people to trust you a little less, because it's like an indication that maybe you're not putting the love and care that you should be putting into some work. Or, if you can't back up your own decisions, then how are they supposed to rely on you? This is a really silly example, but we all know Among Us, right? If you are a crewmate who immediately accuses somebody of being an imposter, but refuses to elaborate and gives no reason, then that makes you immediately look suspicious. It doesn't matter if you're right or not, but you not proving, you're not giving evidence to back up your claims is kinda suspicious. Woohoo, oh my god, Among Us was a meme like 5,000 years ago. I'm gonna stop now, but you get my point. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I make all kinds of art-related videos, and I do hope to be more consistent with my uploads this summer, but even then they're probably going to be sporadic, so I also suggest you hit that notification bell so that you know when those sporadic uploads happen. Whilst you're down there, why not also leave a comment? Let me know, what is your favorite letter of the alphabet and why? Want to check out some of my art? Visit my website at www.meppity.com. I have that as like a portfolio website, so that's actually my professional site, but you can also contact me there, and also that's where I hope to have merch eventually. A huge thank you to my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to further support me, why not head over to Patreon? For $4 a month, you can get unlimited critiques from me, so I can look at your art, your portfolio, give my suggestions. You also get these videos at least 24 hours in advance, and I do hope to post some extra content over there too. Once again, thank you so much to the Ridge Wallet for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate the support. All my other social media is also linked down in the description, by the way, as well as links to the different software that I use to make these videos. Well, have a wonderful day, night, morning, evening, wherever you are, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!